Hey guys, welcome to the Motomaximus channel, and today we're going to cover a story that predates the moto days. So it's something that happened back in 2012 that has to do with me crossing Lake Michigan on a kayak, solo, unsupported, and without a lot of experience. So it's a story that I spoke to a lot of my friends about, and a lot of my coworkers and other people that I've kind of talked to over the years. But I never really sat down and made a video, and I think I'm a little bit overdue for that. So grab a drink, grab a snack, and sit down and let's go over it. All right. So back in 2011, we were having a conversation with one of my bosses, and she was really big into yachts. So she travels Lake Michigan on her yacht. She really enjoyed that as a hobby. And I've been on a yacht before, and we were just kind of having small talk. And she mentioned that, hey, maybe we should grab, her boat and go over to across the lake into Milwaukee. And I said, oh, that sounds fun. Let's do that. And she's like, she backpedaled and said, no, 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 it's very dangerous. It's not something that we should probably do. And it kind of piqued my interest because, it wasn't a small boat we're talking about. We're talking about like a 32, 35-foot boat. So I said, well, what do you mean? How can that be dangerous? And she said that, well, the weather changes fairly rapidly. And if you don't get out of the weather fairly quickly, you will get yourself into deep trouble. And to me, that sounded really bizarre. But again, I did not know much about, as far as nautical things, to even know what's dangerous, what's not dangerous. So I asked, and she kind of broke down like that you can run into storms and other things, and waves can be dangerous and all this other stuff. So again, I was very skeptical. I sat down and started kind of searching of anybody else that may have crossed Lake Michigan before, and obviously there are plenty of boats that cross Lake Michigan. It's nothing that's unheard of. Um, so, what I found interesting is I found the videos of kayakers crossing Lake Michigan, and I think they were crossing from either St. Joe to Chicago or the other way around. So it was a group of maybe about 6 people, experienced kayakers, and their story as far as what they did and how that went and all this other stuff. The route that they took is the southern route, so you're really kind of cutting through the lake. It is a crossing, but it's not a direct open lake crossing. I think you may even be able to see shore on both sides. But anyway, all that stuff aside, I thought it was really interesting. I've never been in a sea kayak before, so that looked pretty cool. And I started doing more research and found a few guys that said that they were looking at doing it for the longest time, very interested in doing the crossing and so on and so forth. So started doing my research, and back in the spring of 2012, I remember posting something on Facebook where I said, hey, here's a list of things I would probably want to do. And one of those things on that list, it was all kinds of crazy things, but one of the things that was on the list is to cross Lake Michigan on my inflatable dinghy. And it was a kind of a military style 16-foot dinghy paired with like a 15 horsepower motor. So that trip would probably take maybe 4 hours, it going 15 miles an hour. So that was something that I put down on my list. And again, there was no commitment or anything like that. It was just something like if it happens, it happens. So finally, I got into some forums, and I got a hold of a few guys that said, I want to do it. If you're in, I'm in. And they talked about plotting different routes, looking for shipping lanes, things like that. And all that stuff was new to me. I'm like, shipping lanes? Oh, yeah, you're right. There's ships going across, so on and so forth, cargo ships. So I started looking more into it. And the more I looked, the more I understood that in order for you to be successful on any crossing via kayak or any other small boat or whatever it may be, you really need to study the weather the most. It really resonated what my ex-boss told me, is that the weather is extremely important. So if you get it just right, your trip will be smooth sailing. If you get it wrong, you'll probably get yourself in trouble. So I started kind of learning the weather. I became an amateur weatherman, pretty much. But I learned the weather patterns. I learned a lot with how the water temperatures affect the air around it. So I kind of figured out that my best shot at crossing Lake Michigan would be around the late July, maybe August timeframe, possibly maybe even early September. So that's kind of a wide window. And there was nothing was set. Again, I was talking to the guys to see if they would commit to doing that trip. In the meantime, I ended up buying myself a kayak, and that's something I picked up on Craigslist. And there were not many kayaks out there, especially sea kayaks. I don't know if that's just not popular enough or kind of a niche sport, but I only found one kayak, and it was about $950, and it was the Wilderness Systems Tempest 170. I think that's the model that I got. So I went out, grabbed the kayak, and it was extremely heavy. It's a pretty heavy boat. It's not fiberglass or some sort of composite or graphite or any of that stuff. Nothing expensive. I think it's polyethylene. I think that's the name of the material, but it's heavy plastic, but at the same time, it's very robust, meaning that if you drag it across rocks, you'll get scratches on it, but it's not gonna crack the shell or anything like that. So I'm sure it could withstand quite a beating, as it did over the years that I've had it now. But so heavy boat, long boat, never been in a kayak like that before. I've only been in river kayaks, really short ones. For whitewater rafting, I've never been in a sea kayak. So that was my first experience. So I got that kayak home, sat it in my garage for maybe a week or two. Finally got around to it and said, hey, you know what? I better try this thing out, see how it feels. And funny enough, I have a pond in my backyard. So I said, let me try it out there real quick. So dragged that boat out by the pond, set it down, got inside the kayak. I didn't have a skirt. I didn't even have a paddle at the time, a kayak paddle. All I had is like one of those emergency paddles that came with the dinghy. So I grabbed that and humped to the kayak. And the funniest thing happened is when I was going into the water, because of the length of the kayak, the nose got into the water, and the rear portion of the kayak was still kind of pivoting on the shore. So teeter-totter, the heaviest object goes to the bottom. So I immediately rolled over, fell in the water, and this was early spring, so it was extremely cold. So that was the funniest thing. My wife was standing right next to me, and luckily she told me to pull out my phone before I even got in the boat. So saved my phone, which was hilarious. But I was soaked. I looked like a drowned rat. Got out, drained the kayak out, and said, okay, let me try this again, do it properly this time. So I got in the boat where it was more flat and was able to kind of get into the water. And did a few laps around the pond. Not a big pond, especially for a sea kayak, because one paddle, I was already on the other side. But nevertheless, kind of got a feel for it. It was very tippy and completely different from what I ever, remember about kayaks, especially river kayaks, the wide ones. This kayak is about 26 inches wide, so it's fairly narrow and very tippy. So if you're not being cautious or careful, you will go over fairly quickly. So anyway, gave it a trial run. The kayak felt great, but I knew that I would have to get a little bit more practice during the course of the summer before I would, say that I'm even ready to do anything like crossing Lake Michigan. So I think the next trip that I took the kayak out was onto Lake Michigan, and the whole thing was ridiculous because my wife was pregnant with our first son, and I think she was maybe at that point maybe 3 or 4 months in. So I remember pulling up to the beach, and it was a long haul, right? It was a long trek out to the water, threw the kayak on my shoulder. And what I did to practice is I also brought an inflatable, what do you call those, donuts? Whatever you do to, when you tow a boat. I got one of those and sat my wife inside of that. And what I wanted to do is just kind of practice, check my strength, and I would tow her. And it was probably the hardest thing I've ever done because that thing literally just makes you stop. Like it whenever you start paddling, you're just not going anywhere. So went out and kind of paddled around the shore with her in that donut, kind of tested out what that would be like. And I did it with me by myself and me with connected to the donut, and there was a obviously a huge difference. It's an extremely fast kayak. 17 feet. Those things really move as compared to the wider ones, or the lake kayaks. The short ones are like maybe 12 feet. So very fast boat, extremely fast boat. But I kind of got a feel for what it may be like paddling for many hours on end, and that was just literally 10 minutes worth of paddling. So anyway, the other thing that I did that same day is try to do the rollover. And I remember how I did it way back in the day when I was still a teen in a river kayak. And I remember having no problems of rolling back up. And for some reason, I wasn't doing it right. So I kept trying to roll over, and I felt like I was going to drown myself because I would go under and I could not come back up. And it was just mostly because I wasn't getting the maneuver just right. So that kind of plays into another thing I started kind of researching later down the road. So good trip. We got back, and I really put everything kind of on ice for maybe a month or two. Did not touch the kayak, did not go out in water. Mostly just, it was really busy at work, and I did other things because that summer I also did several adventure races, and I also believe I did my first Tough Mudder race. If you're not familiar with that, they may call them mud runs, but it's pretty much an obstacle course mixed in with a race. So you go for maybe 10 miles or 5 miles, whatever the length is. So I was busy doing other things. Really was not looking, focusing on the trip or anything like that. And again, I was kind of keeping up the conversation with the guys that were interested in going. And up to that point, everything seemed on par. Everybody was still in, and I had 2 guys again lined up for the trip. What I started doing is, since I had such a failure of doing the rollover maneuver, I started looking to see, in an emergency situation, if you're out in the middle of Lake Michigan and the weather turns bad and you need to roll back up, let's say you went over and you have to roll back up, how easy would it be to either get yourself up, or let's say it's worst case scenario, you can't roll yourself back up, which it's very possible in unsteady environment, especially on bigger waves. What would it be like to get back into the boat, right? Do the self-rescue. And it looked nearly impossible to pull off. And I'm sure there are professional guys out there that can do it with ease, no problem. They can stabilize themselves. But what I was thinking is, if you've been out there for many hours on end, you're very tired, you run into bad weather, and let's say you go over and you get wet, water goes in, and you have to do a self-rescue, right? You jettison out and you want to get back in. It didn't look very easy to do on calm water. So any kind of, you pull up any video on YouTube of self-rescues, people are struggling to get back in, or they do it with, it takes them a minute or two to get back in calm conditions. I'm not even talking about wavy conditions, let alone, 5-footers or more. So I thought that the whole thing was bogus. There's no freaking way that I could master the rollover in a very short amount of time. Nor would I want to be in the middle of the lake trying to, perform a self-rescue in bad conditions. I just didn't think that was going to happen. So what I started looking into doing is figuring out a way to kind of stabilize myself. Some stabilizers or something, pontoons, anything that would keep the kayak upright as much as possible. I found a few kind of ugly designs, cheapy designs, and I said, okay, well, let me see if I can make something like that. And I'm going to bring up a few pictures here in a minute, but I did come up with a few things using, I think they're called crab floats, and I bastardized the design completely, but I was able to figure out a way to mount it to the existing kayak. And it's a good thing that this was a polyurethane or whatever the ethylene, whatever the material is, to the soft type of plastic, because if it was a fiberglass shell, any kind of push on the shell would have cracked it. Where on this type of material, it gave a lot of give, so it was fairly flexible. So I was looking to figure out a way to mount stabilizers onto a kayak, and a design for a cheap way to build out a stabilizer. So I started researching that, and I found my design. I knew what I wanted to do, but I haven't done it up until, I want to say, 2 days before the trip. And a week before the trip, by the way, I did finally take out the kayak onto Lake Michigan one more time, and it was a friend of a friend, a guy that we did the Tough Mudder together with. I want to say maybe a month prior, and he was, I guess, an avid kayaker. And when he found out that I was thinking about crossing Lake Michigan, he thought I was nuts, but he gave major props. So I said, hey, you want to do a trip from out from, where was it? Let's see, it was from Grand Haven to Muskegon. So I want to say it's maybe 10 miles, maybe 10 to 12 miles of a distance. So what we did is my wife dropped us off in Grand Haven, and we took off and we met her in Muskegon. She picked us up there. It was a good trek. We kept maybe 2 miles from shore. Did a little bit of a run down the beach, fairly close to the beach, and there were quite a few waves, so got a feel for the kayak there. And then tried to kind of get away from the shore a little bit farther and see how that goes. But did it pretty quickly, and honestly, I wasn't very tired at all. Even though I think it was maybe 10 or 12 miles, I felt pretty good at the end of that trip. Wasn't tired at all. So I think that was my test to see how that trip would go. Overall, I felt pretty comfortable. So at the same time, I knew that the trip would be, at least the route that I was looking at, was going to be much longer. It was going to be 85 miles from Milwaukee to Grand Haven or Muskegon, I believe that was the point. And the reason why I chose that route is because I knew there was a ferry running from Muskegon to Milwaukee. It's a fairly fast boat that gets across. I think maybe it might be like 3 to 4 hours over 85 miles. So very, very fast boat. So the idea was to take that shuttle, cross Lake Michigan, and then paddle back. And the whole point behind that was, you'll find out later on, but it was a false judgment that waves always moved from west to east. That I was under the presumptions that was always the case, because you always get the predominant wind coming in from the west to east. And I thought that might be a better route than going the other way. So that was the plan, and we're kind of getting up to the last days here before leaving. And what happened is that both of the guys that I was talking to, they both dropped off, and they're like, no, I have something going on, or I can't, whatever the excuses were. They couldn't make it, which wasn't a problem, but it kind of put me, into an uncomfortable state of, now instead of having a team of guys going, it would be by myself, which I wasn't quite prepared for. I knew I could do it, but I wasn't mentally quite there yet. So with that in mind, I had to figure out a way to make sure that I would be, to a degree, somewhat safe. So I was looking for ways to reduce that risk, right? So obviously I had the core things. Let me pull up a picture of my equipment here, kind of talk through it. But my equipment really focused in on making sure that if something happened and if I get into the water, one, I'm able to be in the water for somewhat of an extended period of time, one. Two, I was able to get a hold of somebody and do an SOS. So I was looking for these devices, GPS tracking devices, or I don't know whether the PLD, whatever the heck they're called. But the one that I found is this guy right here. This is the Spot device. And actually, this is the newer version. I had an older one at the time, which had a crappy outer shell that was holding the device in there. I'll talk about that later on. But so I got one of these Spot devices, and the cool thing about them is that not only can you track your location and send it back home, so the people that matter most will be able to track you and see where you're at, you're also able to check in and say everything is going fine, or I have an issue, or there is a SOS, I need emergency, I need to be pulled out. So found this device, It was not very cheap. It was fairly expensive, especially at that time. There weren't that many devices out there. It was a difference between this device and this, what they call InReach Explorer, powered by Garmin. And I didn't have this back in the day because this was, I want to say, 2 or 3 times as expensive as the Spot. So it's something that I really, really wanted, but I could not afford at that time. So I stuck with the Spot. I tested it out, made sure that it worked, and it worked well, and that was my lifeline. Outside of that, I obviously prepared all the necessary things like the lighting. So, you know, on the back of your boat, you have the 360-degree white light. Front of the boat, you got the green and red light. So I had that prepared for the kayak. Other things I had with me are the flashing device, so flashing strobe, a bunch of glow sticks, so in case there's emergency or just need some ambient light, I can kind of crack that out. A boatload of batteries for my other devices. I think I had a walkie-talkie so I can get a particular channel if needed be. I had my bilge pump, which later on in my experience, I would never recommend one of those manual bilge pumps to anyone. I think they suck. And I think that they'll, if anything, they'll put you at risk as well. Again, another story that I'll come back to a little bit later on. But several flashlights, head-mounted flashlights. What else did I have? Figured out my food, what I wanted to take with me on the trip, which consisted of granola bars. I had canned peaches, so peach halves, and I think I also had canned pears. So I figured something light, something that's full of sugar, that could give me energy but not kind of weigh you down. So I thought fruit would be a great way to go. And obviously granola bars were, you know, the second thing that I've had with me. I also brought with me the air horn, so in case you're in an emergency, you could blow the horn and somebody will come get you, or at least realize that you're in the vicinity. Again, that turned out to be shite later on in the trip. First aid kit, and that's something that I use through the trip as some of the medication there. Primarily, it's pretty much a derivative of ibuprofen. So for soreness, for swelling, you take, you know, a couple of pills, and that kind of helped me out, not be as bad over the course of the trip. What else? Tow rope in case somebody would tow me if there was an emergency. What else is in here in my screenshots? A couple of compasses. I had a handheld compass as well as a marine compass. The marine compass was important because that would be the way to track yourself on the water. But in case something happened with it, I had something for redundancy purposes, which was my hand compass. Let's see what else. One thing that I've added the last minute, and I'm not sure if it's in the, oh yeah, it is in the picture here, it's just underneath the cat, is this leash. And this is a leash off of my boogie board that I've had for many years. And I thought that would be a great idea to strap the leash to my hand, and the other end would connect to my paddle. That way, in case my paddle slips out of my hand, I don't lose it. Even though I had a reserve with me on hand, I didn't want to lose my primary paddle. All right, outside of that, I had a thin wetsuit. I also brought a much thicker 7mm wetsuit just in case, and I had that in my front hatch, so in case I would go in the water for an extended period of time, I would be, in theory, be able to slip into that and keep myself warm, as well as keep myself afloat without any effort. My primary wetsuit was my triathlon wetsuit I wore during the Tough Mudder race. More on that later on, but that's the one I wore. And the reason behind that one is because it was fairly thin in the areas that needed to be thin, that give you the maneuverability. And then it would be thicker in other areas like your core to keep yourself warm. And honestly, I didn't really use it a whole lot because I kept the whole thing halfway down the entire trip just because it was extremely warm. And I knew that the water at that time was going to be around 70 to 72 degrees. So for me, it's, if I would go in the water, it wouldn't be a shock. So if I would go in the water, I'd just, you know, zip it up and it'll be good to go. So that was my primary wetsuit for that. Okay, so coming in pretty close to the trip, I mounted or I rigged up my stabilizers. I'm going to bring up that picture here, and as you can see, this is a picture of them in my breezeway. I believe this is the breezeway. Yes. Where is that picture? Here we go. So this is where I got them together. They're sitting in the breezeway, and what they're consisted of is flagpole holders at the very ends. This is going to sound ridiculous, but these are aluminum squeegees, so extendable squeegees. And when I bought it at the store 2 days before the trip, those were used, I believe, for washing your windows in a car, right? So you can reach out without, breaking your back. So very thin aluminum, and so that's something that came into play later on. But cheap aluminum that, to a degree, did the trick. At the end of the aluminum pole, I had these T-connectors, I would say, made out of copper, and there was another portion of the squeegee here that would go across through these crab floats. So that was the design. The idea was to mount that onto the kayak and keep the boat stabilized. So let's take another picture of the kayak itself with those mounted. So here you can see the stabilizers on the kayak and with all the gear, and this is pretty much the final state of the kayak before the trip. And I think this was, I want to say this was the day before the trip. And you can see the drill in the background. This is when I was drilling the holes into the kayak. And I did do a basic test. My basic test was literally just sitting in the kayak in the driveway and then rocking back and forth to see how the flows behaved. How would they bend? How would that impact the frame of the kayak if it was causing any problems? And it didn't. It's all very stable, pretty solid. So to me, that was good enough. I was good to go with that. But this is pretty much all the equipment laid out and ready to go. I want to say it's literally the day before the trip. So this is, you can see the lights mounted on here as well. These are suction cupped to the kayak, and what I did later on is I duct taped them down so they wouldn't go anywhere. So I wouldn't just rely on the suction cups. So this is it. And day before the trip, obviously I was extremely nervous watching the weather, and I believe this was the year that there was a hurricane occurring in the south portion of the United States, and it was causing the weather to be really erratic. Like you couldn't tell what was happening, not even days before. You couldn't tell what's happening in like an hour or two. It was very unpredictable weather. So that was something concern. And again, I bought my ticket for the Badger. Oh yeah, by the way, that's the whole side of the story here. What was it? 2 days before the trip, I called that ferry that ran from Muskegon to Milwaukee, and what they told me is that in order for us to be able to take you across, you and your kayak, you have to put it on top of a car. And that was the most bizarre thing I've ever heard. I'm like, well, why? I'll pay for the kayak as if it's a car. We'll get across. And they pushed back, and they were pretty much telling me that, that's not how that would work. You have to have it on top of a car. We don't have a place to put them where they're not secured. Yeah, all this stupid stuff that made no sense to me. So they really pissed me off. So I was looking for a fallback. I really did not want to drive around because that would be, it would take forever. It would exhaust you by the time you would get to the other shore. And I didn't want to leave my car over there either. So the next thing that jumped into my mind was the SS Badger, which is another boat that crosses Lake Michigan in the summers that goes from Ludington to Manitowoc on the other side of Wisconsin. So that's another place I remember because that's I took a trip there with my parents before in the past. So I thought, hey, why not? Let me give them a call. So I called them up, and they were really laid back, really cool guys. And I said, will it be a problem? I don't have a car, I just have a kayak. Will it be okay? And they're like, yeah, no problem. no problem whatsoever. Just, you know, get your butt out here and we'll take you across. No big deal. I didn't tell him why. I didn't tell him the background or the story, because at that time I really wasn't quite sure if that was legal to do or not, to cross Lake Michigan, especially unsupported, especially by yourself, all this other stuff. So anyway, that aside, I was able to get a ticket, and now it's game on, right? I'm ready to go. Everything's prepared. Now it's just watching the weather, making sure that's fine. And here's a picture of me the morning that I woke up before the trip. And I woke up, I want to say, fairly late. Yeah, I look like I'm in La La Land. And this was around, I want to say, maybe 7 o'clock in the morning. I was completely out of it. And in my mind, I was literally going like, yeah, this is not going to happen. I'm not going to go. But I kept checking the weather, and everything that I saw said the weather's clear. No clouds anywhere west of Wisconsin. No storms or anything like that. For some reason, everything looked just right at that moment. So, you know, I was kind of hesitating and putting it off to a point where, you know, it was time to make a decision. I'm either going or not going. So, you know, last minute I jumped up. I'm like, okay, I gotta go, and everything was pretty much all ready to go in the car. All I had to do is just throw my clothes on and hop out. So I did, got ready extremely fast, got into the car. The kayak was already on top of the car, which was good. So I set off a trip to go out to Ludington, which I want to say it's almost 2-hour drive. And I remember starting off the drive very slowly because I didn't want anything to happen to the kayak. But I had to be there. I want to say, if I remember correctly, it was 9 or 10 or something like that. So I was extremely late. So I started out driving maybe 60, 65. And by the time I got to, you know, close to Ludington, I was hauling ass. I was going 85, 90 miles an hour. I'm just glad that the kayak stayed on. But I was going extremely fast to make it on time. And when I pulled up to Ludington, I was extremely nervous already. You know, all these emotions running through me. You know, kind of like scared and excited, and a lot happening all at once. But I pulled up and I saw the Badger, and they were loading it up. You know, all these cars going inside the ship, semi trucks getting rolled in. And the funniest thing is that I was an idiot, and I loaded all my gear inside the kayak. And that's how I stored it, right? All my backpack, the food, all that stuff was in the kayak. It wasn't separate in the backpack. It was in the kayak. So my first challenge was to get the kayak off the car, which was by myself, extremely heavy. So I just kind of rolled it off. And then it was to pick it up and put it on my shoulder. I mean, the boat is heavy enough as it is. And now you're talking about all your gear, right? You're talking about 2 sets of paddles, you know, several cans of food. I had water. I had several power energy drinks, several changes of clothes just in case one would get wet, a couple of wetsuits. So a lot of gear that I had to pick up and throw on my shoulder. That was my first test. So did that, was able to carry it in, and I just remember walking that thing on my shoulder into the ship, and people were just looking down going like, what the hell is this? You know, I'm not driving in. I'm literally carrying this 17-foot kayak loaded full of gear into the ship. And I was walking past the guys that worked there, and they were really busy with, you know, getting all the stuff into the ship. But I was like, hey, where do I put this thing? And they're like, yeah, you know, you go put it in the corner over there. You know, and the 17-foot kayak didn't look so big all of a sudden in that big old ship, which was funny. So put it in some corner under some stairs and made my way up to the bridge, and had several people ask me like, hey, you know, what are you doing? We saw you carrying that thing in. What are you doing? And, you know, I didn't want to sound like a show off. I didn't want to like disclose too much info. I just literally just said like, yeah, I'm going to be crossing Lake Michigan. And they were like, what? Excuse me? I'm going to be crossing Lake Michigan. I'm going to get to the other side. I'm going to paddle back. And, you know, everybody laughed. And I said good luck and so on and so forth. But let me tell you that I think it's a 4-hour boat ride on the Badger. And here's the deal. It was kind of almost a savior because the original route that I chose, which was Muskegon to Milwaukee, was 85 miles. Pretty long distance. And that distance was cut short by 20 miles when I switched over to using the Badger, because the trip from Manitowoc to Ludington was only, I want to say it's 62 miles. Plus or minus maybe 1 mile, depending, if you're not going in a straight line. So 60 miles, so 20 miles got pretty much cut, which is awesome and a good thing. But anyway, 4-hour trip from Ludington to Manitowoc on the Badger. And I think that was probably the longest trip of my life, because I tried to get some rest. Got up a little early and, was really stressed out. The drive didn't help. So I said, hey, you know what? I might want to recharge my batteries. Let me lay down and get some sleep. I couldn't get any sleep. There's no way. My mind was going in overdrive. So I remember just kind of walking out on the bridge and just checking out the water, because that would be the water I'll be paddling, in just a few hours. So here's some stills of me kind of bumming around and walking outside of the Badger, taking some pictures, got some videos as well. And the funny thing is that not long before the trip, I found out that when I will be crossing via the Badger, this is actually the deepest portion of Lake Michigan. And you can tell by the pictures, because if you look at the water, it's not blue, it's not green, it's literally black. It looks black. And not that you couldn't drown in, in 20 feet of water versus, 300 plus feet of water. It doesn't make a difference, but just mentally, to have that much depth underneath you just kind of is a little unsettling. So anyway, this is pretty much the water that would be going over on the way back. And the conditions look pretty good. If you look at it, there were literally, almost no waves at all. But yeah, that water looked pretty yucky. So anyway, I was extremely nervous, excited, thought what I would do if I kind of chickened out. Do I go back and then just take the ship back again? But no, this was, at that point, it was a one-way ticket. So again, I was just kind of mentally preparing myself of what would be like when I get there. So when we started getting close to Manitowoc, the weather cleared up. Like if you look at the previous pictures, it's kind of overcast. But by the time we got there, the wind picked up just a little bit, and it got clear, absolutely clear, clear skies. It was beautiful. It was perfect conditions at that point. And got there, hurried up, got to my kayak, threw it on my shoulder, and carried it out of the boat. And again, people were looking at me going like, what the hell is this guy doing? And I kind of walked briskly to the nearest beach. There was a little beach nearby that I scoped out on the Google Maps before the trip. But I kind of made my way out to the beach, and I started quickly preparing for the trip. And again, I did not know whether doing a trip like that would be legal, illegal. Would that be considered risking your life, and that you can get in trouble for that, or what? Anyway, so I said, let me get out there pretty quickly and touch off. And I remember people just kind of standing there, checking out what the hell I was doing. And all I was doing is just, throwing all the stuff in the kayak, figuring out what goes where. Like, the food had to be like right behind me. All the unnecessary stuff like batteries and so on and so forth would go into the hatch closest to me. And then unnecessary things like the spare wetsuit would go into the front hatch. Mounted the lights, as I mentioned earlier, with some Gorilla Tape, so it would not just rely on the suction cups. I had them like mounted pretty hard on there. The only thing I had to figure out is, and I figured out later, is how would I turn them on? Do I turn them on right in the beginning of the trip and let the batteries run out through the day? Or would I be able to flick them on with my paddle when it would get dark? So I turned the buttons toward me, duct tape them that way, and that was good enough for me. And again, got everything ready fairly quickly. I think I was ready in about 10 minutes. Then I sat there for, I want to say maybe just 1 minute, just kind of letting my mind cool off before I touched stuff. Then I think I'd like put my phone into the Ziploc bag, close that off, put it in the hatch, put on the skirt. And I think this is in one of my videos that I have on YouTube. But put on the skirt and pushed off. That was the beginning of the trip. And if you look at the weather, it was perfect. Blue skies, perfect conditions, completely flat, no waves in sight. The water was beautiful. Really no wind. So I cast off and I started paddling. And it was smooth sailing. And the funny thing that I found out, again, that's something you should probably do testing on with your equipment before you go on the trip. But as soon as I started paddling, and something I did not account for when I was in my driveway doing the basic testing, is that my paddle was hitting the pontoons, the stabilizers. So whenever I would paddle on the right hand side, it would be fine. Anytime I paddle on the left hand side, because the second stabilizer was closer to me, I would hit it with my paddle, and it was kind of annoying. So I just had to kind of adjust the way I was doing the stroke. I could not do a full stroke all the way in the back. I had to stop maybe just a little bit past halfway and then go forward again. So funny thing to find out when you're beginning the trip. But anyway, I adjusted my stroke and it was fine. Started paddling, and I want to say I was out there maybe 2 or 3 miles away from shore in a very short amount of time, because again, no wind. It was perfect conditions. So making my way out there, and I remember hearing the Badger touching off because they unloaded, loaded everything back up, and I want to say in about an hour they were ready to go back to Ludington. So I remember the ship passing me a distance away and kind of disappearing the horizon, and that kind of set my point to go in that direction. So using my compass, started kind of tracking things, getting comfortable, doing check-ins. By the way, I made an agreement with my wife that when I would go, I would check in. There's an OK button that you can say everything's okay. So the idea is that it could track your location where you're at every 10 minutes. That doesn't necessarily mean that you are there, if that makes sense, right? Maybe this thing is on a boat and it's tracking one way and I'm somewhere else. So the agreement was that if I don't check in, I think every 2 hours or something like that, by pressing this OK button, she would end up calling the Coast Guard. So I made it a point to start checking in every hour. So every hour I go in there and press OK, make sure that that gets sent out along with my trackings. And that worked fairly well. So I started checking in, just getting comfortable, and felt really good. Again, it wasn't hot, it wasn't cold, perfect conditions, and got out there a good distance out pretty quickly. By the way, just a point of reference, I touched off around, I want to say it was 1 p.m. when I left Manitowoc. So this is the middle of the day. The sun was like pretty much right above us, above me, us being the kayak and myself. And then start paddling, and time started kind of fly by fairly quickly. And if I remember correctly, I was maybe 20 or to 25 miles from shore. I couldn't see, the shore anymore, the Manitowoc side. So I would probably say it was maybe 15 to 20 miles. I cannot say 25. I'll probably say 15 to 20 miles out from shore. By the time it was, close to around 5 or 6 p.m. And if you look at the dates, I left, I believe it was the Memorial Day weekend. I think that's what it was, or Labor Day, not Memorial Day, Labor Day weekend. Because the whole point there was I was tracking. I took like a whole week off from work, and I was looking for the right window to go, and it ended up being that Labor Day weekend. So yeah, and the sun was setting. I want to say maybe around 8 o'clock or something like that. So, that gave me maybe couple of hours until the sun was set, and took a video at that point of the sun behind me and I'm pedaling forward. Pretty cool pictures and pretty cool videos. But again, if you look at it, the conditions were perfect. if there are any waves or small waves, so nothing major, and was doing a pretty good job. Tracking very well. I think if you averaged out, I was going maybe 3.5 to 4 miles an hour with the pontoons. And the pontoons would slow me down. I would have gotten much faster if I didn't have those things. But what would happen is that as the kayak would roll in the waves, one of the pontoons would dig into the water, slowing me down. So you put a lot of effort into paddling, and then, you know, something would pretty much just drag you, which is okay. I dealt with it, not a problem. I was able to track my direction using the skeg. Again, you have two ways to track on sea kayaks. Some kayaks have the skegs that you can open and close, and that's how you adjust where you track for windy conditions. And also you can do like a rudder where you steer with your feet. I didn't have that, so I had a built-in skeg, so I was using that to track my direction, and that was working out quite well. All right, so next, if I fast forward, I remember looking a lot for ships. So as I would paddle, I would always kind of look around and just see if there were any boats, any ships, because again, shipping lanes, that was kind of on my mind, and doing pretty well. So the next set of pictures and videos is, this is where the sun began to set. So this is what I call shit becomes real. Reality sets in that, oh crap, this is going to be dark very soon. And I think these images here were when the sun was really already pretty much on the horizon, or very close to there. So it was getting dark, waves were picking up, and something I started to kind of find out is that my whole theory of the wind blowing predominantly from west to east and the waves moving in that same direction was completely off. The whole that whole theory was way off course, and I found out later on. I started looking at some other sites where that would show me the wave directions, and what happens is that waves typically move towards the shore depending which, you know, where the wind is blowing. But what I saw is that if you're in the west coast, the waves would move towards the beach there. In the middle of the lake, the waves kind of move in a circular pattern, as well as not just the waves, but the whole current. It just kind of moves in circles. I don't know why that is, but that's what I just saw when I started kind of doing my research around currents. And on the east side of the lake, the waves would typically move towards the shore. But again, all that would change depending on the wind direction conditions. So started to get dark. Waves picked up just a little bit. A few rollers, a few kind of breaking waves. Again, nothing major, nothing to be concerned about, but again, it gets, as soon as you start getting tired, it's definitely, reality sets in, is that you're here by yourself. There's nowhere nearby. You know, something happens, you're on your own pretty much, and all fails, you're just hoping that your SOS is going to save you. But anyway, so reality set in. I was getting ready to turn on the lights. I was able to finally reach out and press on the little switches on those lights without ripping them off from the kayak. So that was a good thing. I also reached out onto the back one, turned that one on, and I was ready for nighttime. And let me tell you something about nighttime paddling. If you have never done it before, and I never paddled at night, that was the first time I ever went out at night on the kayak. On any type of water, let alone the big lake. But it's something you definitely want to do. So if you're one of those people that are considering doing an open water crossing, whether it's Lake Michigan or whatever the other body of water is, make sure you test yourself out and how you would react to that. And I don't mean from the I'm a tough guy kind of thing. What I mean by that is that a lot of people kind of get disoriented being on the water where they cannot see what's happening to them. I found out that I was not susceptible to seasickness. Even though if you put me on a fishing boat on a charter, it's almost guaranteed thing that will puke. Almost guaranteed. I don't know if it's a smell of diesel or what, or is that constant movement like this in a bigger boat, but I get seasick and I puke. I found out that in a kayak, I do not get seasick, and at no point did I ever want to puke or anything like that. But another story that I'll cover, later on, was another guy that I know that was really big into kayaking, and he also completed the Lake Michigan crossing on his own, unsupported. But he found out that he was susceptible to seasickness, and that really kind of messes you up. So again, just a word of caution, just make sure that if you are going to do a trip like that, definitely test yourself out how you're going to react at night, because it is not a trip that you can do just during the daylight. You will be going at night at some point. So test yourself out. I got lucky, the weather was perfect. And what happens is that when the sun did set, let me see if I can have some pictures here. And there's also videos of me paddling at night. No, I don't have any pictures. I only have videos. So I'll bring those up so you can see what that looks like. But all you'll literally see is, I got lucky. The moon was up maybe 2 hours into the trip. So 2 hours into the night portion of the trip, I should say. But there was a point in time where it got dark and it was literally pitch black. There was no moon. There were very little stars, if any. I couldn't see a whole lot, probably because my eyes did not adjust yet. It was pitch black. It was pitch black. The only thing that I could see, and this is kind of weird, but again, I got lucky with the weather conditions. I got lucky with the temperature of the water in relationship to the temperature of the air, because they were mostly matched. If they were mismatched, what you get is a little bit of fog, and the fog starts to kind of, distort your vision. You will not be able to see really what's happening far up ahead. That day, the weather was absolutely perfect. It was clear, and what I could see is I could see a glow on the horizon, and the glow was from the nearest city. That would be Ludington. So I knew exactly where I was paddling the entire time. Even before the moon came up and I could see the reference stars and things like that, I knew exactly where I was paddling. Just to kind of help me navigate so I don't go in zigzags, I broke one of the activated, I should say, not broke, but activated one of the glow sticks. I started out with one of the green ones, quickly found out that having anything that bright in front of you really messes up with your vision. So that didn't work. I put that on my sides of the kayak, and I opened one of the red ones, and cracked them open or activated them, and put them right in front of my compass. And I also blocked it with the GPS device, so I kind of had it strapped into the kayak. So I was able to see my marine compass, and without blinding myself, because any kind of light that's in front of you really, like, it blinds you. You cannot see anything else past that point. So put all the lights behind me or to the side of me, just had a little bit of a red glow in front if I needed to look down and see how I was tracking. And by the way, it was really interesting because of the way that the current was. I remember having to adjust the skeg all the time, because at first I would have the waves coming at me from the right, then I had the waves coming at me from the left. So I had to adjust where push harder with pull harder with my right hand, then pull harder with my left hand. So constantly adjusting, depending on where the waves and the wind was coming from. No. So yeah, I'll get onto the one part that's coming up next. But so that was a little bit of a battle, but again, I think conditions were good in the sense of everything was clear. Then the moon came up and it kind of lit up, and it was great because the reflection of the moon kind of skimmed the surface of the water, and I could kind of tell what the conditions were like, and when it comes to waves, right? It really helped me out because I could tell if it's too wavy or not. Again, you cannot see the waves coming at you, which is really annoying. It kind of freaks you out from time to time because you're paddling, it's pitch black, and all of a sudden you have a wave breaking over your boat, and it's just like, what the heck just happened? But the outriggers, the stabilizers, did an excellent job because they allowed me to not be surprised by waves. That's one. Two is I didn't spend too much of my core on balancing the boat out, which was, to me, it was the most important thing, because I think that would kind of wear on you from time to time, especially if you're on your own. You don't have a buddy to pull over with and just kind of take a break. You're by yourself. So I was able to paddle pretty much nonstop. I would paddle. If I had to take a break, I would maybe break for maybe 5 minutes, but I could just stop and just float there for a minute or two, right? So it allowed me to not really worry about those kind of things, which was, I think, very important, very good. Whether you agree with using the floats or not, anyway, that's something that I did and it worked well for me up until the end of the trip, but I'll get into that in a minute. So anyway, that said, nighttime paddling, again, very exhausting. I remember drinking, I think it was a Monster, just to get some caffeine, a little bit of a kick, because if you're paddling for, a total of 20 hours that it took me to cross, you get 6 hours into paddling straight through like that, it really kind of wears you down. So, I tried to do anything to keep myself awake and focused. So I would sing songs, and drink the Monster drink, eat my peach halves or whatever they were, pear halves, and canned peaches, get some sugar, and overall, again, I was doing pretty good. I remember it was pretty. I think the most beautiful thing is I could tell that I was somewhere in the middle of the lake. It was close to that because again I could see the the glow on the horizon, and I remember looking up when I was taking a break, just kind of floating there. It's quiet. All you hear is just kind of the sound of the water hitting the kayak, some waves breaking from time to time here and there. And again, there's not a single soul next to you. It was the creepiest, most relaxing, most weirdest feeling ever. And I remember kind of leaning back to stretch out my abs and my core and kind of just relax for a minute. I remember looking up straight into the sky and seeing the Milky Way. And no light pollution, miles around you. It was extremely clear, and I could see that Milky Way was like crossing. I think it was north to south, if I remember correctly. It was just literally just right over top of me. Beautiful. So I kind of leaned back, just kind of floated there, relaxed for a few minutes, and then I pressed on. Nighttime paddling. Also, I remember shipping lanes, all this stuff, always kind of in the back of my mind. I finally identified the ship. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a light quite a distance away, and started kind of keeping my eye on it, making sure I'm tracking, because I honestly I didn't know what ships would be like in the middle of the lake, because you picture yourself like ghost ship, right? You're gonna run into a ship. So I tried to be somewhat quiet so I could hear something if there would be a ship crossing in front of me. So that's what I was picturing, ghost ship. You get other stupid things crossing your mind, like UFOs and other crap. But again, you're by yourself in the middle of a big lake and not a single soul around you. Of course, stupid stuff is going to jump in your mind. But I didn't really know what to expect from ships. But to my surprise, they're lit up like Christmas trees. So lots of lights on the ship. Again, I saw it miles away. And I was tracking it. And it was moving extremely fast, I would say. It was getting bigger, like every, let's say, maybe 10 to 15 minutes. It was getting bigger and brighter. And, after a while, I was able to kind of really make out the shape and which direction it was going in. And I could see that I was quite a bit ahead of it. And it was going to pass behind me, maybe quarter of a mile. I can't say half a mile because that would probably be too small at that point. But probably say quarter of a mile away behind me. So I could kind of make out what it was like, the size of the ship and all this other stuff. And one of the most eerie things happened to me at that moment. I remember looking back at the ship, just kind of stopped paddling, taking a break. I looked back, and when I was done looking at the ship, I turned around and I saw this, what looked like a flare of green, just kind of come straight down in front of me. And it looked like it was just kind of coming down, as if somebody would shoot a flare, it would go up, and then at that point it would just hang there and then come down. That's what it looked like, and it was green in color. And I didn't know what the hell that was. Freaked me out. I paused and I stopped paddling. I didn't know what happened. I didn't know if the ship shot a flare at me or there was a boat in distress in front of me. I really didn't know what to do. So I stopped and I said, all right, well, that's freaking creepy as hell. There may be a boat in front of me that may have, the engines died or whatever else. So I said, all right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to paddle and I'm going to stop and I'm going to listen. and flash my light and a flashlight. By the way, if you think that you can take a flashlight out in the water, like I did, being a dummy, not having any scientific knowledge, I thought that if you have a flashlight and you shine it in front of you, you'll be able to see like the waves and things like that, right? And not knowing any better, that was kind of what I envisioned. But turns out that when you shine light into water, it doesn't really reflect very well. It just absorbs the light. So even if you shine like 2 feet in front of you, it just goes into the water and kind of disappears and looks scary. So shining the light in front of you, all you see is kind of like that glow, and that's it. So if something would be in front of me, I'll probably see it maybe like 15 or 20 feet away, and that would be the creepiest thing probably. But that was on my mind. I'm like, oh shit, there's a ship in front of me that's dead in the water. It has no lights. They just shot up a flare, and I may just run straight into it. So I would paddle. I would shine a light. I would listen. And I would paddle again, and do the same thing. I just kind of repeated and did the same thing over and over again. And so that was quite an experience. And after a while, I'm like, well, I don't know. I probably have already passed at this point, going at the rate I was going. So it was still in my mind, but I stopped doing that. So I just kind of started, I pressed on. Later on, by the way, I wrote about this. This whole trip, by the way, is documented in the Kayaker Magazine. I'll get to it later on because that's when we get into the whole safety thing. But turns out later down the road is I kind of reasoned out that it wasn't a boat. It wasn't any sort of flare. What I saw was a meteor. It must have been fairly large because it was pretty bright, and it just kind of went through the atmosphere and literally just died out right in front of me. Because I don't remember anything going up. I just saw something coming down, and that's exactly what it was. So if you see anything green coming from the sky, meteor. Anyway, so I moved on, started paddling, and I started finally making out some shapes being lights on the horizon. So obviously, like I mentioned, I saw the glow of the city. It was getting bigger. I want to say somewhat brighter. The moon was already kind of coming overhead. And I started seeing lights on the horizon. So little red dots. At one point, I think I started with like maybe 1 or 2 that I could make out. And next thing you know, they multiplied in numbers. And what those were is the radio antennas. In Ludington, there were multiple radio antennas, obviously for airplanes that are flying by. And they're very bright. And that's one of the things, by the way, your mind starts to play games with you because especially with lights, it's very difficult to tell the size and how close you are to the light. Because whether you're 30 miles out or you're 5 miles out, the size of the light feels almost the same. It looks about the same. Yes, so, if you're 30 miles out, it's smaller, but again, it's very difficult to tell the size. So no matter how much you're paddling, it feels like it's not getting any closer. And after paddling for many hours on end, again, your mind starts playing games with you. You feel like you're not making any progress. If you listen very quietly to my videos, I remember getting frustrated that, I'm really pressing myself and I'm not really getting anywhere. So I was, swearing a little bit too. But the other thing that got me a little nervous is I was wondering why in the world the entire trip I was having wind blowing in my face. And that's one of the reasons why I constantly had to play with this keg to get it corrected, set on the right direction. And it was beginning to really piss me off, especially after many hours of kayaking, because again, I thought predominantly the wind will be blowing in my back, helping me, right? And instead it was blowing in my face the entire freaking time. And knowing a little bit about weather patterns and all this other stuff, I'm sure you might have learned this in middle school, where if there is a storm system, it begins to kind of suck the air up. So I'm like, well, wait a minute, if it's blowing in my face, what does that mean? What's happening behind me, right? And I didn't see anything at first, but as I was paddling through the night, and I don't remember what time it was, maybe it was already like 3 or 4 a.m., something like that. It's hard to recollect now, it's been many years, but I remember seeing flashes. So I would paddle, Suddenly I see a flash, like, you know, reflecting off my paddle, off the water that's in the air. So I'm like, well, what is that? And I remember turning around and looked back and saw lightning. In the distance, I could see there was a big storm system building up, and I could see some lightning. And I was like, oh shit, that is not good, right? Because here I am in the middle of a lake. I'm probably the tallest thing in like 20 miles or 30 miles in each direction. And here I am holding an aluminum paddle, right? I'm like, this is not good. This is not good at all. And I remember starting to correct my path um, to go more south, because I could see that the storm system, as I was paddling, looking back, and seeing lightning throughout that time period, I could see that I was kind of moving more north. So I said, hey, let me correct my direction and start paddling more south, which, funny enough, it helped me out because it actually put me on correct course. Because when it started to get lighter, you know, you can tell where, you know, that glow from the city was anymore. It just kind of disappears and blends in with the light. So I was really nervous at that point, really worried, and, you know, again, very tired. I was paddling, I would say, more or less nonstop, but now I was really pushing myself, and pushing myself pretty hard, like almost no breaks. Really put my muscle into it, seeing if I can make some progress and correct my path. And if you look at my GPS courses, let's see if I can bring that up. But if you look at my paddle, you can see that's halfway through the lake, and this is where I started seeing the lightning. My direction has changed. I started paddling more south, and almost too south, right? Because I wasn't going straight at Ludington anymore. I took a more southern route, and this is more to just kind of correct myself and see if I can kind of dodge the storm system that was rolling in. So that's the deviation, of course, that you can see on the map here. But anyway, so you know, now I was fighting a storm system, and constantly wind blowing in my face, you know, getting me very, very concerned, and really start pushing myself. And again, it was not helping the fact that those lights were making very slow progress. Like, you could see them getting a little bit bigger. You could see that they're kind of spacing out a little bit more. So that was telling me that I was making progress, but it just felt extremely slow. I just remember in my head, I was like, oh my God, am I making progress, or am I battling wind? So, and waves, you know, what the heck is going on here? So by the time morning rolled in, and if you watch one of the videos, it is unbelievable how fast it gets light. When it gets dark, it gets dark somewhat slow, right? The stars kind of disappears behind the horizon, and then slowly and surely it gets dark. For some reason, I remember seeing the sun come up, and it was just so fast. It was pitch black, and in the span of, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes, it was fully light outside. There's a video of that, and I got some pictures of it as well. So very beautiful sunrise. But as you can see in the stills in the video, you know, you can see that's quite a few clouds in the sky. You can also kind of make out that the storm system is coming on my left hand side. In the dark clouds, that I think that you can tell that there's some rain over there. So I think I did the right thing by adjusting my course. But didn't see any lightning. It was definitely on my mind that there may be some lightning and maybe some rain, but didn't see anything like that around myself, even though it was overcast at that point. But beautiful sunrise, came up pretty quickly, and that was also not good in a way that the markers that I saw, which were one, the radio antennas, and two, and most importantly, I was looking for what are they called, the beacons, I would probably say, for the channel, for Ludington channel. Lighthouses, I don't know if they have an official lighthouse. They must, right? But anyway, I was tracking a beacon. It was different color, so all the radio antennas were red, and this one was green, and that's what I was really paddling at. And all that kind of disappears as soon as light comes up. All those lights just disappear. You cannot see anything. So I don't think they turn them off. I think they just kind of get dissolved in the light. So I lost that point of reference. So at that point, I was just kind of relying on paddling using my compass and just looking at landmarks and things like that, whatever I could make out in the horizon. Because by that point, I could see land. It was a very thin strip on the horizon, but at least I could see land. And the more I paddled, then you can start making out like, oh yeah, this looks like sand dunes, and this may look like possibly a city or whatever. But anyway, it made it harder to kind of track, which direction you're paddling in. But just did my best. What can I say about that? By the way, going back to the whole GPS thing, the unfortunate thing about these devices, the spot devices, is that you have really no idea where you're at, right? Because you're sending your location over, but you don't know where you're at. And it would have been extremely helpful, just mentally speaking, to have something like this in reach, right? Because on this guy, you can pull up a map and you can see where you're at in reference points, where you're at on the lake, how close you are to shore, what kind of progress you're making, all these different things that you can do on the in reach, which I did not have on the spot. I finally picked this one up like years later, just because I was doing more kayak trips and to the North Manitou Islands, and I just want to be able to kind of see where I was. In addition to on this device, and I'm not trying to do like a review right now, but this device has a lot more features. This allows you to communicate bidirectionally through text messages. Yes, you can message back. You can pretty much talk through that. You cannot call yet. I think maybe some of the newer devices allow you to make like a call, like a satellite phone. But nevertheless, it allows you to check the weather. It allows you to bidirectionally communicate. It allows you to have a map. You can zoom in on the map. You can see where you're at. You can do waypoints, so you can kind of keep yourself on track. And it also has the SOS, so the button on the side here that allows you to call for help if you need help. The only thing I do not like about this device is the fact that it uses rechargeable batteries, where on the spot if the batteries die, okay, big deal, you can pop in a few AAA batteries and you're up and running again. This guy, if it dies, you better have something to charge it with. But to give him credit, the battery on this guy lasts a long time. So if you don't touch your screen for like 5 seconds, it turns it off. Maybe it's not 5, but maybe like 10 or 15 seconds. Whatever the time frame is that it's extremely efficient. So it keeps the battery in good working order for a long period of time. So I'll give them credit for that. Overall, the build of these devices are very nice. But anyway, so that was kind of worrying at me, the fact that I couldn't tell where I was and what kind of progress I was making. It just felt like I was not getting anywhere. I was paddling my ass off, and I literally felt like I was standing still. So I knew that I was making progress because the landmarks were getting bigger. I could see things. But it just, again, when you're tired, your mind is playing, games with you, and you start getting frustrated because, it feels like you're in a standstill. So that morning, so the sun came up, paddling my butt off, getting close, getting a little frustrated. What happened is that my stabilizers, one finally broke, and I was wondering what the heck was going on, because all of a sudden, the boat was turning left, hard left, and I was having to correct myself a lot. And then I looked over and I saw that the thin aluminum was rubbing so much against inside the flagpole holder that it's not like the shaft itself broke off somewhere in the middle where you would think it would break. Because of that constant rubbing, because of the waves, up and down and all this friction, it broke off right where it would go inside the flagpole holder. It broke off and just kind of hung in there, but it was causing my boat to turn. So I had to reach in, break it off, and stow it. I think I stowed it right in front of me, within the bungees, and tried paddling with only one, and that was causing problems because now all the weight was on the right hand side of the kayak, and as soon as I start paddling, I would be going in the right, which was really annoying. Now this was probably, I would say, the most riskiest part, because I couldn't paddle with just one stabilizer, because again, it was causing me to just go in circles. I had to literally reach over while now having to balance the kayak out, reach over and break off that second stabilizer forcefully. So I stowed my paddle, reached out, grabbed that stabilizer, and started pulling it as much as I could without causing too much shake, so I wouldn't go over, because it would really suck, right? You're maybe at that point I was what, 10, 12 miles away from shore, and to go into the water at that point would really suck. So I was being very cautious. I very slowly pulled onto that flagpole holder, not the stabilizer, pulled on it until it broke off. I was able to kind of wiggle it back and forth and cracked it off, stowed the second one in front of me, and at that point it was very cautiously, because it was very unstable at that point. And your core is not used to it, because you were letting the kayak balance itself out via the stabilizers. But it became very unstable until I got used to it. So maybe 15 minutes into it, I was already like, okay, I got this, no problem. So I was very cautious, paddling very slowly until I got into the rhythm, and then I started paddling again. And at that point, by the way, I was making very good progress, because I was putting a lot of muscle into it, doing full strokes now that I could. But again, you're very tired. It's on your mind. That's you don't have a lifeline anymore via the stabilizers. So I was kind of nervous, and at the same time, I was seeing boats in the distance, right? People fishing. There were some sailboats and so on and so forth. So I'm like, okay, I'm fairly close to shore. Mission successful. Why don't I just ask somebody for tow, right? All these boats are not that far away. Let me just, signal and get their attention, and let's just get a tow, because I don't want to risk this thing, especially when I'm this close. I would hate to go into the water and having to do an SOS. By no means did I ever want to press the SOS button. That would be the last resort. Like if the weather was really bad, or I go in the water and I'm, fighting for life, only then would I hit SOS. It was never in my mind that I would hit an SOS button. So that was out of concern at all. I wasn't planning on doing that. So I decided to reach back and use my flare kit. So the idea was to get somebody's attention and maybe ask for a tow. So I got out my flares, and these flares were not like a flare gun. These were the emergency flares that you hold one hand and then you pull on the string, and then it's supposed to it's like a shotgun shell pretty much. It fires a flare up in the air, and you have 3 of those. So I'm like, okay, I really don't want to do this, but I'm so close and I'm so tired, and I lost my stabilizers. I don't want to take a chance right now to go into the water, something happening, getting separated, whatever it may be. All these stupid things start running through your mind, especially when you're exhausted. So I'm like, okay, the hell with it. I'm shooting the flare. So I saw some boats, again, in the distance. I fired off my first flare, and nothing, no response. I waited maybe 2 or 3 minutes, no response. Nobody even looked in the direction. You could tell that they're still tracking the same direction that they were going. I think there were maybe like 5 or 6 boats out there at that time. So I'm like, okay, that's great. Let me do a second one. So shot out a second flare, and again, nothing. And I'm like, okay, well, this is not good. I only have 1 flare left, and the only thing left at that point from the emergency perspective is my air horn. So got the third one, and I remember I even got some burns from that one. I don't know what happened, but when I shot it, when I pulled the string, there was a lot of backblast, if that's what you want to call it. But I remember I burned my thumb just a tad bit. So shot out the third one. Not a single thing. Nothing's happening. All the boats are doing their same stuff. Fishing boats were probably too focused on fishing, or they're partially drunk. I don't know what they were doing, but no response. I started getting a little pissed off, getting a little bit worried. But so take out my little air horn, and I'm like, okay, here we go. I got to do this. I got to get somebody's attention. Start blowing the air horn and blowing it, pausing for a few seconds, blowing again, pausing for a few seconds. And I did that several times until the air horn ran out. So, imagine that, right? I'm close to shore. I can make out more or less landmarks because I could see sand dunes. I could see the shape of land. I could see the boats in the bay, how it looked like a bay. And nobody's giving a damn, right? So after going through all that, that pissed me off more than anything else. So I wasn't upset. I wasn't concerned. I didn't look at the spot. I just got pissed off because I was pissed that nobody was, paying any attention. So, what the hell is the point of emergency stuff when you can't get anybody's attention? So that gave me the kind of energy that I didn't know I had still left in me. Got really angry. So I'm like, okay, the hell with this. I'm paddling my ass to shore. If nobody gives a damn, it is what it is. So I got busy, focused, and I started paddling my ass off. And I was going fast, really fast. So paddling, tracking, and I saw the bay. I really started making out where I was, and I could see that, I don't know, somehow I ended up exactly in Ludington, exactly in that bay. I could see the lighthouse. And I remember, being close to the bay at that point. And I remember hearing a sound in the background, like a, which was the badger setting off. And I knew two things, that it was 9 a.m. or 10 a.m., one of those. I think it was 9 a.m. That it was 9 a.m., one, and two, that it was taking off to go to Manitowoc. So I knew exactly where I was at that point. I knew it was the badger. So I started tracking. I remember seeing the badger taking off in the distance, and all these boats. There were so many boats out there. So I got into the bay, got through all the traffic, and I remember finally, like, last paddles. It was pretty warm out. The sun came up. The clouds cleared out, and I remember paddling past the wave breakers, or the channel, whatever you want to call them. And there's some people there, people walking their kids and stuff like that. And I was just getting my few last paddles in, taking that corner, and I landed on the beach. So, buried the kayak nose right on the beach. And the hardest part was to, I got the skirt off. It was to get out of the kayak. My legs were not working at all. Like, they were, I don't know how to explain it, but they were numb from being in the kayak in that position that whole time. So I got out, the water was fairly cold, and I felt really, really good. I remember just I came out of the kayak and just kind of sat there in that cold water, like, on my fours, just relaxing. I was numb. I was really numb. So just sat there, relaxed for a minute, dragged the boat onto shore. And then I sat next to the kayak for a few minutes, just kind of, stretched out my legs, started massaging things a little bit. I think I took a few pictures. There was Coast Guard. What they were going through is they were walking around and pulling out the buoys for the beach, right? The no swimming buoys, or when you're going too far or whatever, the markers. So they were pulling those out of the water, and I saw them working and just kind of let them do their thing. But I pulled the kayak on shore, and the next step at that point was, after laying there for a few minutes, get all my weird gear off, and then find my way back where my car is, right? Because I landed on the beach. I wasn't quite sure where the parking lot for the badger was. So I had to kind of figure that out. Made my way out through the city, and my phone was dead. By the way, it wasn't working. I think what happened is that moisture somehow got inside the bag, my Ziploc bag. I'm not sure if it was me constantly going in and out, because I think I was getting my granola bars out of there. So my hands were a little wet, so going in and out, that moisture inside the bag is built up, and I think that's what might have fried the phone. But phone was dead. I couldn't pull up GPS or anything like that to see where I was, but I kind of just started running through the marinas, kind of hugging the shore, went through the city and found my way back, found my car, got into it, drove back to the beach. And I remember driving back, and I was kind of like dazed at that point. Really tired. Again, no sleep for a long period of time, because you're talking about waking up at 6:30 or 7, whatever the time frame was. Waking up that day, being up all that day, right? Then paddling most of that day, right? From 1 p.m. all through the night, and coming back to 9 or 10 a.m. Now you're up for just a little bit over 24 hours. And not just up for 24 hours, you're working your ass off for 20 of those hours. So now I've been up for 26 hours, 27 hours. So anyway, in the day's state, I drive back to the beach where I landed, and I remember pulling up to the beach and going like, "There's no freaking way I'm going to be able to drag that kayak through whatever it was, maybe like 300 feet, maybe a little bit even more at that time, to drag that thing all the way back from the beach to the car. Not going to happen." I looked around, and I was like, I don't give a shit. I hopped the curb and drove right on the sand out to the beach, and it pulled up right next to the kayak. It was maybe 10 feet away from water, and kind of laid everything out, and I sat inside the car. I remember I pulled up, and I just sat there inside my truck, and I fell asleep. That was the funniest thing. I pulled up, sat there. I don't know if it was like the heat or what, but I remember falling asleep, and I was out. And I don't know how long I was asleep for, maybe 15 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. But I remember waking up to the Coast Guard, one of the Coast Guard guys knocking on my windshield on the passenger side, going, he's like, "Hey, you're not supposed to be on the beach like this." So I don't remember what I babbled out. I said something like, "Yeah, I know." I was trying to apologize. So I was like, "Yeah, I know. I don't typically do stupid stuff like this," or something along those lines. And I remember he looked at me, and I looked like death at that point, right? Looked exhausted and dirty and all this stuff. I had sand in half of my face because that's how I was laying in the sand on the beach when I got in. So he was just like, "Hey man, you all right?" I was just like, "Nah, man, I'm not." I don't know if I told him what I did or not. I don't think I did. But he's like, "You need some help?" I was just like, "Sure, yeah." He's like, I was like, "I don't think I can get that kayak up by myself right now." So he was like, "Hey, okay, hold on, no problem." He's like, "Hey guys, let's help this guy out." So a couple of the guys helped me out. So they grabbed the kayak, and I didn't do anything. They just grabbed the kayak and I threw it on top of the truck. I was just, "Hey, thank you very much, appreciate it." And all I did is tie it down, and I drove the truck off the beach. And again, I wasn't sure what I was gonna do. Like, now I was a little confused. Like, do I find a phone and try to call my wife, just to let her know that I'm in? At the same time, I knew that I had my spot, so I pressed OK, so she knew that I was still there and I was tracking. The only thing on my mind at that time was I wanted some food. I was hungry as hell, right? The canned peaches will hold you over for so long until you need to get some real food. So I'm like, do I go get some food and get some change so I can use a payphone? Where would I find a payphone, right? That thing wasn't, payphones were a thing of the past at that point. So I remember I got into McDonald's, and that was the first place I found for food. And so that was open in the morning. So I pull over to McDonald's, I get some food, whatever, junk food, number one, whatever the hell it was. Get some food, and remember the lady was looking at me like I was mental, because again, I had sand on half of my face, looked all scruffy, looked all dirty. But I didn't realize that until later when I saw myself in the mirror. I was like, "Whoa, what am I doing?" But anyway, completely out of it at that point. Got my food, got my change, and I decided, you know what, the F with it. I'm just going to drive back. I'll be all right. It shouldn't be no problem. I'm kind of awake now. I got a little bit of a kick of energy. I'm just going to drive my ass back. I'm going to keep this thing on so it could, still track, and, the wife will know exactly where I am because she can see me going down the road. So that was my phone call. And I drove back, and again, very like dazed state. I was fine, but just kind of tired, especially when you're by yourself, nobody to talk to. I just try to keep the windows down, get the fresh air blowing on me, and just keep myself entertained with some really loud music. So I got my ass home. I remember I pulled in. I didn't take anything out of the car. I just dragged myself out. Got inside the house, and I think the first thing I did was like take a hot shower. That felt extremely good, especially on the shoulders. That's the biggest thing. My shoulders were burnt, and my shoulders, my forearms, as well as my wrists. The joints inside of my wrists were probably hurting the most from gripping the paddle. Um, and So I remember I lay down on the couch at that moment. I didn't text anybody or anything like that, I don't think. I just lay down on the couch and I fell asleep. And I remember when I woke up, it was my dad came over, and obviously the news traveled. I think everybody was tracking where I was at that time. And I didn't tell my parents, by the way. I didn't want to freak them out. They didn't need to know until I got back. But I guess the wife let everybody, let everybody know. I sent out my GPS tracking link to my coworkers. And it was funny because they were telling me later that they were tracking my trip, and everybody was staying up way past their bedtime. Um, a few of my friends were tracking where I was, and I guess my wife let my parents know about the whole thing later on. She also called the Coast Guard. That's the other thing I didn't know. I didn't want to let the Coast Guard know, but she let them know as soon as I left, apparently. And she called them and told them that, yeah, this my crazy husband is crossing the lake. And they're like, okay, sure, no problem. So she gave them the link as well, and they're like, yeah, okay, we'll just monitor and see where it goes. I don't know if they ever did or not, but it's kind of funny to hear about it. But yeah, so my dad pulled over, and I think one of my best friends popped by as well. Just kind of say congratulations and see how I was doing and all that. Obviously, I saw the wife later, and yeah, it was a fun experience. But in a nutshell, that was my lake crossing. Again, very crazy trip. And only like maybe 2 years later, telling this story over to my coworkers, my friends, all this other stuff, having a lot of giggles about it. And I'm sure I missed something because there are all these little details here and there that come up, but that I can cover. But I ended up writing like a summary for myself, maybe a month after the trip. I wrote out a summary just to keep all those thoughts fresh in my head, and I can post a link to that in the details below in the comment section. So yeah, I did a full write up, and I shared that out, and some people read it, especially my coworkers read it, and they had all these questions. And the most common question that people ask me, this is the funniest thing ever. They're like, yeah, okay, the trip, the gear, lessons learned. Okay, I get all that. They're like, but how did you go to the bathroom? Which was the funniest question to ask, by the way. I don't know why that always comes up, but okay, here's what happened. My plan for the whole bathroom thing, my plan was whenever I needed to go, I would have this bottle from a Powerade, and I would squeeze that between the leg portion of my suit, stick it in there, and then take care of business. And then pull that back out and drain into the lake. That was what I thought was going to happen. What really happened is that when I went to try to put the bottle into the wetsuit, I didn't realize how tight those things are. There's no freaking way you can squeeze a bottle in between the wetsuit and your leg. It was not happening. So I didn't know exactly what to do. Do I jump out of the boat? That was out of the question altogether because that was very risky. So let me tell you, you cannot believe how hard it is to deprogram your brain to tell you you have to forcefully wet yourself. Everything in your body fights that whole idea. So when I finally had to go, and that was maybe, I want to say, maybe halfway through the night. I don't know how I do it. I don't have to go to the bathroom. For some reason, on trips like this, I conserve my fluids. I don't know what the problem is, but I don't typically go to the bathroom very frequently. But anyway, I had to go somewhere halfway through the night, and you can imagine jumping into the water at night to go number one wasn't completely out of the question. There's no freaking way. I was already scared, shitless being out there in the dark in the first place, and just the thoughts of what could be in the water, especially at night, just no way. So I had to force myself to go inside the wetsuit, and it was not very comfortable, and it was very unnatural. Again, as a baby, you kind of program not to ever do that. So again, you go, and it's uncomfortable, but you do it anyway, and that's how it went. So, if in case you were wondering, how did that work out, and that's what happened. I didn't have to go number two or anything like that, and good thing. Again, on these kind of trips, I don't really. That's the last thing that would ever cross my mind. Even if I'd be out there for 2 days, it probably would never even happen. Besides the fact that I ate fairly light before the trip and during the trip. So there's that. Just get that out of the way. So that's the number one question that always comes up when I cover the story. But anyway, so I did a write-up of the whole trip, and one of the kayakers at work, he was an avid kayaker, many years, under his belt. He's like, you know what? I've kayaked many, many years, and I've never read anything like this. He's like, look, you have got to submit this to a magazine. You have to send this over and have them printed or something like that. I'm like, okay, what magazines? I didn't know anything about kayaking. Again, I was not an avid kayaker, especially in sea kayaking space. So I'm like, I have no idea. I'm like, okay, sure. So did a quick Google search and found several magazines that focused then on kayaking and specifically sea kayaking. And I sent it in to several of them. And I think I gotten two responses. One was from one magazine, and they were kind of like, okay. And then the second one came in from the Sea Kayaker, which is this magazine here. And this is actually what ended up happening is I got published. My story got published in this magazine. It is the Sea Kayaker, I think it's the August edition. Let's see which one this is. Yeah, August 2013. So this is exactly a year after my trip, the crossing. So I sent it in, and they sent me a reply. They're like, yeah, we're interested in running your article. We can tell that you haven't published before just because the way that you sent it in to multiple places. So I didn't know any of those rules. I'm not a writer or anything like that. I just sent it out to multiple places to see if anybody would respond. But anyway, they said like, hey, we're going to run this article on two conditions. One, obviously we have to kind of go through and clean up some of your information in here, so it reads well. And two, that you agree to do this, run this article as in our, what would we call it, safety section, lessons learned pretty much. So I said, yeah, sure, by all means, I understand that this was not the smartest of ideas, and I'm sure I'm lucky to be alive, but I agree. Let's do this. And what happened is that, funny enough, they really did not clean anything up in my story. My story was, I don't know, maybe 12 pages long. They published maybe 10 pages worth of my material. They only cleaned out just a few little things here and there, which they thought was unnecessary, whatever it was. But they literally printed my entire article as is, with just a few changes in wording, very minor stuff, and with a lot of the images that I had in my article. So it got published. So it starts on page, I believe it's 40. Let's see here. Here it is. Page 41, Sea Kayaker, August 2013 edition. So you can see my mug on this page. Here we go. Can straighten this out real quick. So here it is, crossing Lake Michigan, and it starts on this page, and then it goes into the rest of the article. It has images of me when I first got into the water on the kayak in my pond that the wife took pictures of, the gear, some of those images that you saw. So they took this whole article and they printed it, and it was funny because the kayaking community, it was split. Some were like, this is the ballsiest thing we've ever seen. And then the other ones were saying that this is the most idiotic thing I've ever seen. Pretty much saying that you were crazy to do something like this with zero experience and you're lucky to be alive. Which again, I agreed with both. One, it's a cool story, but at the same time, I acknowledged that that was probably not the brightest thing ever. However, I gave myself credit too, because it's not like I went into it blind. I did my homework. I picked just the right weather conditions. Gear-wise, I thought I was more or less ready. The whole stabilizer business is that was, some people were split on it. Some people said that was smart. Other people said that that's dumb. You should have learned how to roll and all this other stuff. And again, going back to the beginning of my story, I could go both ways, right? Yes, certainly I should have learned how to roll the kayak. But again, if the conditions were shit, being by yourself, you really want to limit the risk as much as possible. On that subject, by the way, and kind of going into more of the equipment and some of the other things that kind of came up over the years, I don't know if you ever heard of the guy by the name of Don Diamond, but he is if you think that this is crazy, that guy is definitely crazy. Don Diamond, I think, is the only person that I know, and I think the only person out there that crossed all 5 Great Lakes back to back, and not just crossed them, but he crossed them at their geographical center points. So not the shortest routes, but geographical center points. And in case of Lake Superior, that's I want to say close to 100 miles in Lake Superior, by the way. So I've heard about the guy, found him on the Sea Kayaker online on their website back in the day. By the way, this magazine is now defunct. They don't operate any longer. They closed down maybe 3 years after my article was published. Everybody's digitizing things, but Don Diamond, I looked up a lot of information. I actually found the magazine that he was published in. I do have it. That's one of my cherished magazines that I have. And I think I'm going to do a separate video that's going to cover his trip. Because again, since the Sea Kayaker died out, there really isn't much out there that covers his trip. So I really want to make sure I give the guy a lot of credit for being really ballsy. And not doing just one crossing, not 2 crossings, but all 5 Great Lakes. And what happened is I ended up tracking him down. So the sound may sound stupid and crazy, but I pulled out the white pages online and started finding every Don Diamond in the United States. And I remember in the article somewhere said that he was out from Minnesota. So I narrowed down my search and I found, I think, 3 or 4 Don Diamonds in the Minnesota vicinity. And I started calling them. I called the first guy and I got no response. And I called the second guy, and I think what happened is that I called, there was no response. I called again a short time afterwards, maybe 2 or 3 hours later, and a lady picked up, and I'm like, hey, I'm looking for Don Diamond. I'm not trying to sell anything or anything like that, but I'm looking for Don Diamond. I'm a kayaker, and he had a magazine, blah 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 blah. And she's just like, hold on. And then on the phone comes on a guy, and it was Don. And I started kind of going into, it's like, hey, I'm just trying to locate Don Diamond, who was a big into sea kayaking. I'm a sea kayaker myself. He's just like, hey, that's me. So it was incredible, this older guy at this point, right? And when he wrote those articles in Sea Kayaker, I think he even wrote some books. He was like a younger guy. But, in the early 2000s, he was already getting up in age. But anyway, he picked up and, he got all excited. You could tell by the sound of his voice, he was really excited. And we started really talking about it. It's like, hey, I just completed Lake Michigan crossing and, I wrote an article and I know about your articles. It's really nice to meet you, all this other stuff. And I just got to, we just started talking about his trip too. And I remember I brought up, I said, hey, on my trip, I utilized these stabilizers to just keep me upright so I wouldn't have to worry about it. Just kind of explain that aspect. And I said, hey, the community is a little split, right? Everybody's giving me shit for having these stabilizers. What is your thought on that? And he's like, you know what? Screw all those guys. And the reason why he said that is like when you're out there by yourself, it's really life and death, right? You want to eliminate the risks. Even on his trip, he didn't use stabilizers, but what he did is he used the sponsons. I think they're like you inflate them and then you tie them to the side of your kayaks to stabilize yourself that way, so you can either sleep or rest or whatever you got to do. So different concept, but that's what he did on his trip. He's just like, look, when you're out there by yourself, it's life and death. So do whatever you got to do. And I'm like, you know, damn, this guy's right. He knows exactly what he's talking about. So even though he never really used the stabilizers like what I had, he had other methods to keep himself safe and afloat where he needed to be. So anyway, again, I think I'm going to do a separate video on that topic because I really want to share his story. I'm going to scan the pages out of that magazine that cover his 5 crossings, and I'll share those out because, again, I don't think you can find those magazines any longer. Maybe on eBay from time to time you can run across those articles, but those are becoming very scarce. So I will do a separate video on that, and what I'll do is I'll also kind of link the videos up so you can quickly jump over to that video and read up on those stories. But anyway, so that's that for him. That aside, the guy that I connected with and published the article, he obviously said that we want to have a whole safety section on this, and they did. They covered the safety aspects of my trip, what could have been done better, whether it's gear or getting classes and learning how to kayak better and do the rollovers and so on and so forth. And again, I agree with all that, so I'm not going to disagree. I should have done those things. I was just working on my timelines. I was working with what I had. And again, that was initially planning on going with multiple guys and not by myself. So not coming up with excuses, but that's what happened. So safety section, again, I agree with most of it. Some things, again, I give myself a little bit of credit. But was I lucky? Yes. Was I lucky with the weather? Yes and no. Yes, I was lucky that nothing happened weather-wise. Two, but at the same time, I did my homework on the weather. It's not like I just picked a day and went. I made sure that it was clear enough for a particular window of time for me to finish the trip. And luckily, I didn't run into any waves. But there's that. I did speak with somebody that did run into problems doing a crossing, and I'll do a separate video on that. And I don't want to give his name away, but I'll just give his first name away. His name is Matt. He did a lake crossing maybe 3 or 4 years after my crossing. His first attempt was unsuccessful. He had to get helicoptered out. He actually used the spot to SOS, and he got yanked out by the Coast Guard. And that kind of connects with the whole thing about getting seasick, because if you become seasick in the middle of the lake, now you start really losing your energy. And what happens is that by the time he recovered, the weather caught up with him, and the waves picked up, and it was just, the conditions were not good for any kind of paddling. So they ended up leaving his kayak afloat, and he got pulled out and got taken to safety. A year after that event, he did finally do the lake crossing, and he did it in the surf ski. So he said, I'm not using a regular kayak, I'm just going to do it in a surf ski. So if I need to jump out into the water or whatever, do a self-recovery, there's no bilge pumping that I have to do. And that's, with that, I think I'm going to kind of cross over into the gear, what you should have, what you shouldn't have, and some of the lessons learned. So for those that are interested in doing a trip like this, by the way, over the years, people have been contacting me through YouTube going like, hey, I'm thinking of doing a crossing. What do I need? Any tips? Any suggestions? Things like that. So people will contact me, and I'll just kind of give them the honest truth. I'm like, here's what I dealt with. Here's what you may be potentially dealing with. Some things to avoid, some things to look out for. So let's let's dig into that, because I think it's going to really help you if you're interested in doing, whether it's Lake Michigan or another lake. If you're doing an open water crossing, I'll give you some tips on that. And a lot of those things kind of talk to what my story was that I covered. So people contact me, and the number one thing was, what should I do, right? How should I do the crossing? And I always say two things. If you can, get a buddy. Don't go by yourself. It's very dangerous. Can you do it? I'm sure you can, right? If you're ready for it mentally, you're ready for it physically, you can definitely do an open water lake crossing without any problems. My suggestion was redundancy. So if you have a buddy, great. Make sure you have several paddles with you. Equipment-wise, make sure you have several of everything. If you can, have several types of GPS devices. So if you can afford it, by all means, either have 2 spot devices for redundancy in case one fries. You want to make sure you have a secondary lifeline. I didn't on my trip. I couldn't afford it. If I would have to do that trip again, by all means, I would have multiple devices on hand. If you can, have different types of devices with you, because they work on different types of networks. I think the spot device works on Global Star, and the InReach works on some other network. I think it's called, I'm forgetting the name now. Iridium, I think that's the name of it. So 2 different types of networks, so you're getting better redundancy. The second thing is not just about redundancy, but if you can get a device that you can pinpoint your location on a map that you can see, it can go a really long way. And I think if I had this device on me on my trip, I wouldn't be panicking towards the last leg. I could see that I was making progress and just stay calm and just complete the trip without any issues. Also, if I needed to, I could text somebody and say, hey, here's how it's going. I may be running into a problem, or whatever it may be. You could have a dialogue without too many issues. So redundancy is number one. Multiple paddles. If you can have a buddy with you, definitely go together. Chase boats, by all means. I'm not going to put somebody down because they have a chase boat, even though I think that if you have a chase boat, it takes a lot of the stress off of you. So if you're just trying to do the crossing, just to get across, great, have a chase boat. That way, if something happens, it can just yank you out and you can finish the trip without, putting your life at risk. But, putting a chase boat into the perspective really, to me, takes the adventure part out of it, because, again, you have that lifeline, right? I didn't have the lifeline. That made it more riskier. It made it more adventurous. So just kind of giving my lowdown on that. Aside from that, obviously bring plenty of water with you. Definitely bring a lot of, energy drinks if you can. Is going to help you out, because the number one thing is to make sure that you stay alert and you stay awake the entire trip. You want to be alert at all times, whether you're looking for boaters or just, focusing on the trip. You stay hydrated, you don't get too hot. If you get too hot, there's potentials of getting a heat stroke, which will make you tumble over. By the way, that's the other reason why the stabilizers help, because if you're on your own and you get heat stroke or you get sunstroke, what may happen is that you may lose consciousness and you're going to go into the water. And you go into the water, you're going to suck it up and you're drowning. So you can take your whole rolling back up thing and throw it out the window at that point. So if something happens and you get dizzy and you lose consciousness, you go in the water, you're done. So if you have stabilizers, at least you have some sort of chance to just kind of sit there without rolling over. By the way, that was the other reason why I had so the stabilizers were on my mind, and why I utilize them on my trip. All right, other things that you have to look out for from the equipment perspective is lighting. Just make sure you're lit up like a Christmas tree, especially at night. And I think that's extremely important. Again, boaters are not paying any attention out there, as I learned, whether it's daytime or nighttime. You want to be as bright as possible. That's also the reason why when I went out shopping for paddles, I got paddles that had bright yellow tips. So when I'm paddling, you could see something yellow coming up out of the water. So if your paddles are red, great. If they're yellow, great. If they're black, right, like a lot of the composite ones, the fiberglass or graphite ones, whatever those really light ones are, they're almost always black, and they would blend in. So what may happen is that the boaters will run your ass over because they couldn't see you. So you want to be as visible as possible out in the water. So that's another thing you have to look out for. On a long trip like that, when it comes down to paddles, by the way, I couldn't afford a $400 paddle. It was not going to happen. I paid $35 or something like that for my paddles made out of aluminum, and they were fine. They did a great job. I found the second set. My first set was these crappy paddles that were somewhat straight, and they sucked. I got the ones that had a very aggressive tips, so I could really dig into the water and pull, get a lot more speed out of that. So that was nice. But yeah, for a $25 paddle, those were excellent, and they did the job, got the job done. The only problem is they're slightly heavier, so you may not feel it right away, but if you're paddling for 18 to 20 hours, you're definitely going to feel it then, and I did. So if you can afford expensive paddles, by all means, do it. Same thing with the kayaks. If you can get yourself a really nice kayak that's fiberglass and gel coated and really slick and fast with a rudder, go for it. It'll only make you faster. You'll get the trip done quicker and all this other stuff. So I knew what I could afford, and I was working out on a budget. Got it done. So anyway, other things. As I tell anybody that contacts me around crossing the lake, obviously you ask them how many years of experience they have, all this other stuff, even though I didn't have that much experience at the time. But I asked them, have they ever been out in the open water? If not, can they picture that in their mind? I could picture exactly what that was like. Did they take any, sample trips, like longer trips, 10 to 20 miles, just to see what that feels like? I typically ask guys, have they ever paddled at night? Because if you haven't, definitely give that a shot, just to see how your body reacts to it. Do you get seasick? Things like that. I also tell them that the one thing that's going to make their trip successful, as I covered already in the video, is you have to be able to read the weather. If you're just trying to guess for a window, you pull up Weather Channel and you're like, oh, it looks clear, let me go, you're going to get yourself in trouble. You really need to study the weather. You really need to look at not only the wind conditions, you need to look at the marine conditions, you need to look at water temperature, right? At least surface temperature needs to be warm. If it's in the 60s, mid 60s or below, I would never go, simply because if you do go in that water, you have only so much time left until you get hypothermia and you're done. So, when I was crossing the water temperature, the surface water temperature was 72 degrees, 72 to 75. So if I do go in the water, at least I have some time until hypothermia sets in. Definitely do your homework on that aspect, by the way, because when it comes down to Great Lakes, I don't think any boater out there has any kind of immersion protection, right? When they go fishing, or they're taking their families for a cruise on the lake, I can almost guarantee you that 90 to 95% of those people do not have any kind of immersion protection. So if something happens in their boat and they go in the water, they literally have maybe 15 to 20 minutes until hypothermia sets in, and then you're out, right? So hopefully by that time you're able to get, send out an SOS or contact another ship to come rescue you. But that's one of those things, is that you definitely need to consider that, especially if you're bringing family members that are either elderly or really young kids. Very risky. When it comes to water, you can't fuck around with that. I'm just, pardon my language, but that's really what it comes down to. Just, you have to be safe from that perspective. So anyway, water temperature is extremely important. Again, if it's cold, That increases the risk. So if it gets really cold, wear a thicker wetsuit or preferably a dry suit at that point, if you can afford it again. When I went, it was fairly warm. So anyway, study the weather. You have to be able to understand and predict what the weather is going to be like, now and up to the time where you start doing your trip, right? Because it could be by the time you take off from your house and you get to the lake, and you get to the other side of the lake, the weather has already flipped, right? So it becomes dangerous. So if the weather changes, you're going to be, you may be unlucky and catch shitty conditions. So there's that aspect to it. So train yourself to be able to read the weather extremely well. Things that you don't control, obviously, is luck. Things could change on a dime. On Great Lakes, it's very possible that in the matter of an hour, weather could really change. But again, try to predict the weather the best that you can. Look at the high pressure and low pressure and see where things are at across the United States. So that is number one. If the weather is good, physically speaking, I can guarantee you that anybody can technically do the crossing without any problems if the conditions are right. So again, coming back to gear, wear a wetsuit like I mentioned. If you can, if it's too hot, at least wear halfway down, but make sure you're wearing some sort of immersion protection. You have the spare paddle, you have the lights, that's important. We talked about the GPS devices. Compass is extremely important. If you can't have more than one, regular handheld compasses do not do a very good job on the water, because what will happen is that as your boat moves, it's very difficult to keep it stabilized and straight so the arrow does not point in the right direction. That's why they have marine compasses. So use a marine compass. If you have more than one, by all means, have one with you, at least one, if you can have two. So marine compasses will get you and keep you on track. Self-recovery, self-rescue. So in case something does happen, you got to be able to get yourself back into the boat, right? So I use stabilizers. You may just be okay with doing self-rescue with a paddle and like a life jacket or something like that. So if you're comfortable doing that in crappy conditions or any conditions, great. Definitely practice it if you can, but be able to get yourself back into a kayak and self-rescue. I mentioned way back in the video that I'm not a big fan of those the handheld bilge pumps. The reason why I do not trust those stupid things is because when you do get back in the boat, okay, you roll the kayak, it's full of water. Now you have to pump all that water out, right? You're sitting in the kayak that's full of water. Let's say you close the skirt in and you stick the bilge pump between you and the skirt so more water doesn't go in, because now you're at the same level as the water. You now have a task of pumping all that water out, right? While balancing yourself out with all the water moving inside and the waves, right? And you're bilging out, and it's not like it's 5 pumps and you completely drain all the water out. Nope. It's going to take you at least 10 minutes to close to fully get all the water out of the main console, main hatch. And you're never going to get all of it. It's just not going to happen. So you'll get most of it out. By that point, hopefully, luckily, you haven't rolled a kayak during any of that time frame while you're doing, the pumping. By the time you're done, you're going to be so exhausted in your upper body. Believe me, I have done this on another trip. And you're going to be so exhausted from pumping that hopefully nothing happens. Again, hopefully you don't go back in the water, and hopefully you have enough energy left to keep pressing on at that point. But, hopefully you don't cramp up either, right? That's the other scary part. If you cramp up, all of a sudden you're screwed. So it's a lot of work. And yes, there are different bilge pumps, different sizes and all that. But nevertheless, when I was considering another trip, another crossing many years later, and I was supposed to be the Lake Superior crossing, I do have some videos on my prep for that. I was going to. It never happened, by the way. Hopefully, if the stars align, I may do that trip at some point when I'm a little bit older. But I was going to employ the electric pumps. So have a small battery, and then have an electric bilge pump that can just flip a switch and get the water drained out in a matter of 30 seconds. So if you can pull that off, by all means, do that. Because it's more than likely is going to save your life. Even if you're not crossing the lake, even if you're just doing casual paddling, it's not a bad idea to have something like that with you. So anyway, something to consider. Outside of that, I think that's really primarily it. I mean, I'm not even going to talk about having a life jacket on. Obviously, that's a no-brainer. Always wear a life jacket, always. And if you can get a comfortable one, specifically for kayaking, wear it. I don't know how many times you pull up the news on your phone in the summertime and you see all these deaths when people, see good weather outside in early spring and the water's cold, and they go out kayaking and they're inexperienced and they're not wearing any kind of submersion protection like a wetsuit, nor are they wearing life jackets. And what happens is that they go over for whatever reason, intentional and non-intentional, they go into the water and it's freezing cold. And what happens is that before even hypothermia sets in, when you go from hot temperatures to cold temperatures, your muscles tend to lock up and you get spasms. And when that happens, you have no ability to keep yourself afloat. And a lot of people drown because of that. So they'll find an empty kayak floating around, and then they'll find a body several days later. So please, if you can, not if you can, you should, absolutely, that's a requirement. Wear a very nice, preferably a very nice kayak specific life jacket. I didn't have a kayaking life preserver, I should say, on my trip. I just used a generic one. It got the job done, but I got a lot of chafing, by the way, from kayaking nonstop. I got a lot of chafing in these areas under my armpits. So if you had a normal, specifically made kayaking life jacket, is going to definitely help you out a ton. So think about doing that. Let's see, outside of gear wise, I think that's really primarily it. There's nothing else that I think I can cover. I considered wearing gloves, by the way. I did have some gloves I took with me on the trip, my workout gloves. Perhaps the neoprene gloves will do a better job. And the thing about some specific kayaking gloves is that they're pre-curved. They're not straight like normal gloves are. They're pre-curved, meaning that they help you hold your paddle better. So I think if I had those, that might have taken quite a bit more strain off of my wrists, because I think that hurt more than my shoulders when I was done with the trip. So consider wearing or getting yourself some nice neoprene gloves. I think that may help you out quite a bit. I actually did not wear any gloves. I started out with my workout gloves, and maybe, 30 minutes into the trip, I'm like, oh, these are garbage. I took them off and I just paddled straight out with my wrist, nor without anything. So there's that. Headgear doesn't matter. If it's the sun is fully out, just make sure you don't get any kind of heat stroke. Keep yourself cool. Wear a hat if you can, a bandana, something that'll keep your noggin cool when it's hot out. But outside of that, I think that's primarily it. I don't know. I'm probably going to remember something later on, but I'll want to add. If that's the case, I'll put it down into the description down below. But I think that's really primarily it. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and conclude this one. I think it was really nice to be able to kind of talk about this out in the open. I've covered this story many times for my friends and coworkers and all that, but I never really made a video on that. So hopefully it came out well. And again, as I have said in many other videos, if you have any questions, feel free to ping me through YouTube, leave a comment. we can always connect offline through email. So if you ever think about doing a trip, I just want to hear some ideas or whatever, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be glad to respond and help you out. With that said, hope you liked the video. Hit a like down below, and if you haven't had a chance to subscribe to my channel yet, please do so now. There's going to be a lot more new content coming out shortly, a lot more stories on many other topics. So we'll keep things more fun for the upcoming year. All right, well, take care, everyone. See ya.